All right, we're back with another live stream in the hot seat again, talking about guppies, why I love them. Hopefully, you guys will have some questions about guppies. I've been nerding out on guppies kind of too much over the last few weeks. I've been definitely going down the rabbit hole and deciding I want to breed guppies again. Part of that is from reading some articles and stuff that Dr. Wallstad published on her blog. And really, just the whole monster guppy thing is what reignited it. I missed having, giant guppies, and so often people ask, like, what are the guppies that I love the most? And the reality is, I kind of love mutt guppies the most. My chat, for some reason, has let me refresh the chat. There we go. Okay, now we're golden again. Good. I like mixed fancy guppies the most because I think they bring the most amount of color. Now, I definitely have lots of strains and I've bred them for profit in the store and just my own enjoyment and all of those things. But if I was forced to keep just one, I would keep just the assorted ones because you see new tail patterns, new dorsal fin patterns, new body color patterns, and there's just so much to it, and you kind of never know what's kind of coming out of it. And when you look at the tank, it's kind of like a kaleidoscope. It's always changing in color and morphing, and your tank, the way it looks 1 year, 2 years later, is bred a completely different way, and all of that. So I'm hoping you guys have got these guppy questions, and someone Goldie had said I missed the live streams where he talked about like one subject, and I kind of do too, and I thought that was a good idea for this one. Since I was already going to talk about guppies, let's try to keep it more on guppies, just because I'm hoping there's other guppy nerds like me, basically. And that's why I put up a poll in sorry in are you guys keeping guppies, yes or no? Just so I know, like I'm kind of convinced myself that I'm going to be doing quite a bit of guppy content here coming up because that's what I'm enjoying, and it's easier to make content when you're enjoying and playing with it than when you are doing something where, like making a video about, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that's not very fun, like a filter. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, but when you're talking about a fish you're enjoying, and I was filming guppy fry just the other day, some B-roll for a video I was making, and stuff like that. So, and it's letting me spend more time with the guppies, which I'm really enjoying. So, and I've also started sourcing guppies. I'm bringing in. My hope is I get back to my roots like I was 15 years ago, where I would bring in strains I couldn't find in the United States from Thailand and Indonesia and these places, and they're big money. But if someone can put the money up once, and then you can breed them, you can then get them distributed around the country, and now everybody can enjoy that fish at 20 or 30 bucks a pair as opposed to $200 or $300 a pair. And so I love guppies in that they seem totally accessible, as in everybody can keep guppies. Pretty much, if you have an aquarium, you can keep guppies. It's not, you don't need a big tank. You can do it with a small tank. You can do it with large tanks. I love it's accessible. I love that there is fanfare for it. There's guppy clubs. There's guppy groups. There's guppy only sellers. And if you think about it over the years, like, who do I keep promoting? It's, John Oliver and Twin City Guppies, and basically anyone that's dealing in live bears, I naturally gravitate towards them because I'm into that. And so, uh, I've also been longing for somewhere to hang out and talk about live bears, and that doesn't really exist anymore, in my opinion. The Facebook groups aren't that, from what I can see. There's not really any forums anymore that are that. And when I was just trying to find even simple things like, what are people doing right now to increase longevity, get bigger fish? Who's got the biggest fish? Who's got the longest longevity? Or is anybody keeping guppies down at 68 degrees? I'd love to get a hold of those strains, all these types of things. And I'm not finding it. It used to be guppies.com had all that kind of archival information, and Facebook all current social media is not good at archival stuff. It's just not suited for it. It's great for sharing and seeing in the moment, but it's not good for crowdsourcing and following up 9 months later and then being filled in on the conversation you had a year ago and to see where you're getting to in the results. And videos aren't that either, So maybe someone's got a forum that I could be a part of, or maybe we'll make a forum. Discord's also not that, by the way. A lot of people, it doesn't lend itself to how do I read about the person that was doing what I want to do from 12 years ago, and what were their challenges and where did they get it to. And following a lot of the thing that I like is, oh, this person started this strain, then they were working with it, then they were working for 5 years. Now this person had some and this person had some. And is trying to find where can I get them again so I can take that journey and start taking it a little bit further, hopefully. That's part of the part that I like, where, yes, I do love going into stores and you're more likely to find cool guppies in the mutt tank, or even cool pairs at other, like every store, maybe not every, but a lot of stores will have someone who likes live bears near them. And maybe they've got, wow, they got the best swordtails or the best this guppy they've had in a very long time right there for you to buy for $20. And that's super alluring to me. And you get that a little bit in African cichlids and some other stuff, but guppies or live bears, and guppies in particular, really have, I feel like guppies, this isn't meant to put down the other groups, but I feel like guppies they have a big group around them with the least amount of fish policeness. So there's big betta groups, there's big oxalotl groups, there's big African cichlid groups, there's big discus groups, there's big catfish groups, pleco groups, guppy groups. But when you get to live bears and guppies in general, they are perceived as a more beginner or lesser than fish. And anyone that's really been into them for a long time know that sometimes it's harder to breed some of these live bears. Like breeding half beaks is way harder, even though they're a live bear, than breeding apistogrammas, most of them, in my experience. But they just like, oh, it's a live bear, poo-poo it, and all of that. And I think that because of the fact that they're disregarded, it is more new friendly. And then also, new people to the hobby naturally are drawn towards guppies because they're colorful and they look great. And so because there is that new person in the hobby standing right next alongside to the person who's been doing guppies for 70 years straight and is old and crusty, that creates a middle ground where like everybody can play in that space. And I really enjoy that, where you get into like a killifish group and it's only old and crusty people, and you're entering in new, and there's not that common ground. It's like, oh, you didn't know what fish I was talking about based purely about the collection point? I don't even have to say the scientific name. You should just know that only one killie comes from that collection point, right? So, yeah. All right, I want to jump into some questions here because I think you kind of understand the passions there for me, and I want to talk about it. So, when making muppies, which is the male and which is the female, and what's the combination of molly to guppy fry? I've never made muppies myself, or gollies, and that's when you crossbreed a molly and a guppy together, you can get kind of giganticized crosses. But the problem I find is that I don't know of anybody, and I'm sure it's out there, but it's never made it to mainstream. I don't know that anyone that has crossed those and made these. You can get big delta tails on a molly, and vice versa, and that kind of stuff. I've never met anybody that says, "Oh, yes, I made them, and now I have them breeding." Instead, usually when those genes cross, they become sterile and can't make more. So that's why we're not seeing where in a different live bear, like swordtails and platies, when you do cross those, they're totally viable. And for the most part, swordtails don't have much color. Platies have all the color. How we got colorful swordtails? We cross the two. And so that would be an example. Like, yeah, those ones are viable and they're super easy. I don't know of anybody that's really having great luck making muppies or gollies, which would be the fastest way to be like, monster guppies are huge by crossing them, but haven't seen that yet. I've ever done the albino koi Dumbo ears. I love this strain, and hoping to get one going soon. I haven't done that specific combination of albino, koi, and Dumbos. I've got some super high coverage koi guppies that Dean's been working with that I'll probably get a big group going here. And I do like Dumbo ear, but back in my day, Dumbo ear didn't exist. So to me, that's like the newfangled thing. That and ribbon fin gene and swallowtails, which if you were to ask me between Dumbo, ribbontail, and swallowtail, in my opinion, the only one that makes it look better to me is the Dumbo ear. I like the Dumbo ear. I'm not a fan of the other two traits. In fact, I will go out of my way to not buy them. And so just not appealing to me. In the store, what's the price point of a mixed guppy? I can tell you very specifically. I'll look it up to make sure I'm not incorrect. I want to say it's either $3.99 or $4.99. Let me take a look here. We are at $3.99. So $3.99 for a male or a female fancy guppy, just normal fancy guppy, which could be almost any variety, that gets mixed into there. And sometimes they're fish that I bred. Most times they're stuff we bought, But when you breed, you don't exactly get, oh, it popped out 10 females and 10 males. You get a mix, and so sometimes we have too many males or females, and when I have extras, I will just mix them into the fancy mix so that they still find good homes. They're still good fish, but can't sell them as pairs. Let's see here. We're trying to mostly focus on guppies today. There's a nice local fisher in Australia that breeds guppies and has them at lower temp. I can't remember his name, but it's Nick's Guppy Expert, who goes to Thailand from time to time. Yeah, so if you're unaware, maybe not everybody here is keeping guppies. Only 62% of you are, but it used to be that guppies would be attached to a name, like, oh, those are Stan Schubel's guppies or someone else's guppies, right? And the name would usually, you'd put a name behind it. So instead of like, oh, this came from this country, it would have someone's name. And the name, you'd put your name on it when you were proud of it. And what that meant back in the day would be they could go cooler water. They had big spawns. They had all the traits you wanted. So like, oh, they got this tail and they're this color and they're breeding true, right? And then also they were disease resistant. So if you were to make a new fish, you would subject it to things like funguses and ick and things like that. And you would purposely let them die out until you had the survivors. And the ones that could survive were the ones you would then breed on. And so after you worked with this for 5-7 years, you would have a fish that had all the colors, had the body shape you wanted, maybe it was bigger or smaller, whatever you're breeding for. 95% of the babies came out looking like the parents. They could go at 65, 68 degree water, and they wouldn't get illnesses. And so when you got that fish that was then, usually named after the person that made it, you knew exactly what you were getting, those genetics. Those genetics were really good, and you wanted them. Now we don't buy, there isn't a Corey McElroy, koi Dumbo guppy. It's just, oh, that's a koi Dumbo. And the genetics might be from 7 different farms. They're all carrying different genetics. And one was only ever raised in hot water and only does well in hot water. Another one might be cool water. Another one's only ever seen live food. Another one only breeding true 50% of the time. And so I'm hoping if there's a passion project I can work on that is not business related, that is breeding guppies and live bears in general, and hopefully getting some people in the hobby to stand that up. The only person I can really think of off the top of my head right now that I could attach a name to, I don't even know if I say breeder, but would be Adrian HD. He collects a lot of wild populations of guppies and carries some stuff that a lot of people don't, but I'm not sure that, and maybe he is, so I'm just not sure, but I'm not sure he's working with a strain to go, hey, this is now different in some way, and you could recognize that fish as that person. That doesn't really exist anymore. It's more about what country to come from and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that maybe in 5-7 years, which my outlooks get longer now that we've been doing YouTube for 10 years and the business is 11 years old, I can look at a project going, hey, maybe in 5+ years, there will be 10 or 15 people that go, hey, wow, those are XYZs, this version of that live bear, and they're sought after. and not so much just like, hey, those are this famous breeder or this famous store and that kind of stuff. And I think overall that's good for the hobby, because I know that a fish that's been bred for 5 years by a home hobbyist and continually made better is going to do better for me personally as a fish keeper than one that was developed last year at a farm and is not as stable and hasn't seen bacteria before and hasn't seen some adverse conditions and were only kept professionally. So that's my hope. Don't know if it'll become reality. Maybe it takes 20 years. Maybe it takes 2 years. I'm not sure. How many tanks would I say it takes to breed a strain of guppies? I think the bare minimum to improve a strain, if you're just breeding a strain, you can colony breed one and just cull the ones you don't want. And cull a lot of times means kill, but it doesn't have to mean that. When I cull, mostly it's going to the store. Hey, these guys, yep, they go to the store and get sold. They don't stay around and breed. And so you could do it as low as one, but you're not going to see big changes very quickly. It's going to take years and years and years and years and years, but it's a real cool, easy way to do it, and lazy. Where if you can get to 2 or 3 tanks, now you can start separating out some pairs of fish to go, ooh, I wonder what these genes will look like. And back when you could see guppies.com and stuff, the general answer would be 7 tanks was the minimum to maintain and improve a strain fast enough that it would be worth your time. And so you basically had to have like a tank for babies, baby males, baby females, and then you had like strain 1 and strain 2, so they're sister strains. They both have the genes, but you want to outcross. So that's 4 of the tanks. And then you could start pairing. So you put a pair between those together, raise that up, separate out those babies, and then take the best from males and females out of there, put them back together, and then you'd get maybe an improvement. Meanwhile, you're moving out all the other fish to stores and other hobbyists, so you could keep that kind of line going. And you could definitely go, wouldn't it be easier with 10 tanks? Yes. 20 tanks? Yes. But at a certain point, you got to be really dedicated to be keeping 20 tanks of the same fish. And so 1 is the minimum, and any that you can add to that will technically, if your goal is changing the way a fish looks, or even you could argue even just keeping it genetically healthy, the more tanks you add, the easier that's going to be. 1 male and 2 female red dragon guppies. Any tips for breeding? All guppy breeding tends to be fairly the same. Lots and lots of plants. Floating plants help. Density helps. If you have, one, like this tank right here, is not going to make nearly as many guppies than if all of the black spots you can see were filled in with plants and you couldn't see the gravel. That will, when they drop a batch of fry, you then, if they drop 30, you might go, wow, 29 survive. In this tank, maybe, well, you'd have to take out the fish, right? But maybe only 12 survive because a lot of them got eaten by the parents or other adults. And so feeding very often, feeding good quality foods, and offering lots of plants and hidey holes and that kind of stuff, and not having too much flow. And like in this tank, the canister filter I put on here has an intake sponge. You don't want to just suck them up straight into a filter and have them get eaten, right, by the filter. So doing all of those, and then time. Time is on your side. Of every 30 days, you're going to make more. And so as you're doing that, you guys haven't seen the update on the monster guppies, but those guppies are now up to about this big. They're in the next month about breeding age. And so it's a very slow process of like, oh, it's like doing nothing for like 3 months, but then it's going to go and then and it'll exponentially keep growing to like, wow, that's a lot. And you got to be ready with the food and the water changes and the density in plants to continue to keep that going, unless you're going to be moving pairs at more just fish out. So yeah. Yes, I did switch hats. This is the Fish Mania hat that I was gifted. That I'd throw that on today. What do I think of the golden guppies? In my opinion, they are not as good as I wanted them to be. They are good fish. They are healthy. But I'm looking I want more metallic yellow, less black undertones. And so I'm actually bringing in another, I think, trio from Indonesia. And I'm hoping that they will have some of the traits I want. Specifically, I definitely do not want and it's very common out there, the ribbon fin 24 karat gold guppies. I do not want those genetics mixed in with mine. I do not like ribbon fin or swallowtail. Just, I think it looks like a fish has been beat up. And then the swallowtail, or no, sorry, the ribbon fin gene, male gonopodiums get too long. And so they actually can't breed at all. And so you actually, just like when you want to breed like leertail and some of the high fin swordtails, the gonopodium gets too long and they can't breed. So you have to breed normal to fancier female, and then you get like 50-50 coming out of them, where I would just prefer it. Like, I don't think the ribbon fin gene necessarily makes the fish look better, and so I would rather just have more come out the way I want and not make this more complicated. But sometimes, and I'm not a guppy genetic expert or anything like that, but sometimes you can have genes so isolated that, to get the metallic gene you want, it only comes with that ribbon gene until someone finds a way to separate it, if it can be separated, which I'm hoping that's not the case, because I don't like that ribbon fin gene. But, we will see. Half the hobby for me is just, I just want to buy them and I want to play with them. Worst case, they'll be quality fish and we'll sell them at like $20 a pair at the store, and someone else will love them. You don't always have to love everything. Like, sometimes I buy fish. I would say it's like trying food at a restaurant. You order it and you go, yeah, I like my normal better. It was good to try it though. And that's what the guppies are sometimes. Like, yeah, it's all right. I guess I'll go ahead and, move these ones out and try a different one again. So it doesn't always have to be that way. JT Fish Keeping started an experiment on guppies for male and female ratio at different temperatures. Might be interesting to you. Yeah, if it works out, that'll be one of those unsung studies where, like, yep, it took a year and he was actually able to figure something out, and now we all get to benefit from that. But so often they get interrupted, the study does, or it's inconclusive. And we've watched it happen with guppies, other live bearers, crebensis, African cichlids, and so often the answer is actually like, kind of inconclusive. Golden guppies are great to breed into other lines. I call mine the dirty blondes. Yeah, when you see the oversaturated 24 karat gold guppies online, a lot of times they could have been photoshopped and enhanced and saturation turned up and all of that, which I know that's probably what's going on. So I expect something not as good as that. But that doesn't mean that what would show up might still be amazing. Like, wow, this is super cool. Like, my favorite yellowish, goldish fish so far that I've ever kept and has bred true would be the German Berlin buttercups, as they call them. I love that fish. It was one of the first probably 10 strains of guppies I ever kept. And I haven't found them as nice as I had them that first time. And but I do routinely bring them in. I think what happened is those were really nice, but then people, on average, just decided that the tequila sunrise guppy was a cooler looking guppy, and that became like, yeah, we'll just make those instead of the German Berlin buttercups. So, the tequila sunrise guppy is amazing too, but I like the other one a little bit better. And this is just, it's all preference. Like, at the end of the day, you're feeding and cleaning up poop from an animal, so you better keep the one you like. That makes sense. Like, hey, get the one you like looking at if you're gonna feed it and clean its poop. And that's what I do. So if I like something slightly more, I'll swap them out. If I can get good genes and a good source, right, I'll do it. How would I go about starting a new line? I've got a couple streams that I really love and think they would make some really neat offspring. Spend the next month and a half learning Punnett squares and just what genes are dominant, which are recessive. When you start mixing some of those genes, what would some of the likely outcomes be? I would probably also review the beta genetics that GN did for the club. So if you're not a club member, maybe join that, watch that, and see how in depth it can get, how many generations you might have to go to get the combination of traits you're trying to get together. And that's why it takes like 7 years, even though it's a fish that you can technically breed like every 3 or 4 months and get 3 versions a year out of it, 3 to 4. It can take many years to make these things, and so um, yeah, it's very cool to do, but just know that I'll call it like a thankless job. You'll make this new guppy that will be amazing, right? And everyone goes, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing!" And they're gonna hand you $50, and then they're gonna breed it, and I'll have the exact same thing you do, except I spent 30 days and you spent 30 years making it. So, do it for the love that you love it and that you want to bring something into the world that everybody can enjoy. And if that's your goal, you'll probably have a lot of fun doing that. Just don't get upset when you're like, oh, then they moved on 6 months later because everybody had it. Like, yeah, you made a thing and it's amazing, and now everyone is chasing the next new thing. And the next, like, oh, look at this. It's a multi-grass, swallow-tailed, glass belly, albino guppy. And you look at it and you're like, it's new, but it's not good. Like, I don't like that fish. It's the same feeling I have when it comes to the black or the dark night rams. Like, it's new, but let's not fool myself. It is not better looking than a German blue ram or a gold ram. Those fish are better. It's just the dark or the midnight ram, they're new. And so you trick yourself in like, no, looking worse is better somehow. Like, no, it's not. Like the gold and the normal German blue ram are still mind blowing that nature created that, and we were able to create that out of a fish. So yeah. Let's see here. Do tank mates like shrimp or snails improve guppy breeding? I suspect that shrimp may, as in when they breed and make little shrimp babies, guppies can eat them. I'm actually convinced that potentially unchecked snails would hinder it. And what I mean by that, if you have a big guppy colony and you drop an algae wafer in there, and if you have a ton of snails, all the snails can create a ball, and then none of your tiny fry can actually get to it, right? So I could see that going, that could actually hinder a little bit. That being said, usually you put so much food in a tank, it kind of doesn't matter, but I think shrimp probably beneficial, snails in moderation beneficial, but I'm not convinced they're actually better. I'm also not convinced it's that much worse. So I wouldn't go out of my way like I got to eradicate them all. I wouldn't do that either. But, if I was setting up a tank, I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to be like, I better stock a lot of snails. They would just probably naturally happen from the amount of overfeeding and the amount of guppies I'm making and the amount of poop that's there. So I must see these German buttercups. Let me see if I can find. See if I can find any good pictures of one. Let's see here. They had, yeah. So I run into this a lot where I fall in love with a thing, and then it's really hard to find it again. Garnelio's got something fairly close, a male German yellow, but the Berlin buttercups had like a red laser line across their like back too, that was really pretty cool looking. Which I'm not seeing in a. Let me get rid of buttercup and try yellow guppy. There's so many little strains. Like, this is a little bit closer. I'll link the one that I'm like, this is the closest, but it was still better here in a second, just to make sure. Yeah, that's the closest I'm seeing. So it was like this one, but better. Let me make sure that that website's not going to be something horrible. Yeah, so here they're calling them the yellow German Makarif guppy, which that's true. That's another. So let me type in Makarif. See if that's going to get us to a closer version of what I want. Yeah, a little more on brand, but I'll link this website, which you could buy these ones. Apparently, are they sold out? No, they got them. Looks like $6.99, but they're just male, so that's its own. But I'll link it in the chat here for you guys. So with those ones, what would I be seeing that would be different? The yellow and white transition was a lot clearer. The tail was nice and round. And then that red little part on its shoulder, as I would call it, kind of dwindled down to the tail and was a real nice, clear looking color. Now, this has a lot of flash on that picture. And you can see, like, the top one, like that's a tiny bit of red, and the tail is kind of, the yellow's faded out. And so the color's not the best, but you could imagine if that tail was round, and didn't have the faded yellow around the tail. And then that line kind of went all the way down, and the yellow was more intense on the peduncle. And in the two fish that you see in there, you'll see that one's got that red spot with like no yellow by the tail, and the other one's got more yellow. Imagine that 80% of that fish is yellow, and only the front head part is white, and then it's got that nice red stripe kind of going down. That's what I consider, what I knew when I was keeping them and breeding them, as the German Berlin buttercup guppy. But the yellow Macarif is probably from those same lines, because they were always very close. So, yeah. Let's see here. What do you think of show guppies with the giant fantails? Yeah, so I like them. I think that the thing to watch out for, and if you watch Dan's fish did a tour of my fish room, and so it's like all live bears, and mostly from him. Just happened. I didn't realize that when we did the tour. I was like, oh yeah, these are from you too, apparently. Anyway, like I've got some delta tail Moscow guppies, black Moscows, and they get a fairly big tail to them. But the problem is their peduncle, which is just, it's kind of like saying their butt muscle, essentially. The part where their tail attaches like the rest of the body, it's fairly narrow. And so when you have these big tails, kind of think about it like if you had, when you get like, let's say a big like fan or like something that's wide and you're trying to move it through air, there's a lot of drag. Well, your muscles got to be stronger to move it faster to swim, right? Well, when that muscle's not very thick and not very strong, they actually can be so weak they can't get off the ground. So when they stop swimming, they just fall to the ground, and they can't move that giant tail enough to actually propel them to swim normally. And so I don't like it when the fins get that big and they don't develop out the body right so that it can carry that tail. And so usually what you're doing is you're getting a fish in a color you like, you're crossing it with a tail that you like, and it comes out with a lot of those features, but the peduncle muscle and body traits of that can't carry. And that's what it's called. When a fish can't carry its tail, that's the problem there. And so I like the way those tails look if they can carry them. That's really what it comes to. 5 gifted memberships from Paul Martin. To continue on from earlier, we live streamed earlier. I will try and match that if it'll let me. Sometimes it'll lock me out going, oh, this looks like suspicious behavior. So I will try to not have that happen. Let me try to get to the live stream here, and I will match. Let's see. Right here. Membership gifting. 5 memberships more. And we're clicking the button. All right. That's actually why I don't like the huge tails. I like the shorter tails. The fish can swim. Yeah. So also, with the big tails, it slows the fish down. You typically can raise more babies easily that way. Where like my Vienna guppies, they've got the short round tail. They can chase down the fry super good. But there's a lot of cool tail shapes we don't see very often, like the spear tail, spade tail, that little round tail. There's a top sword and a bottom sword tail on guppies. There's all these different things, and you just don't see them as much because that big, colorful tail is hard to say no to. But I do believe that the fish are a little bit easier to take care of. They're a little bit hardier without that because they're just not likely to get stuck on things and chased down by other fish and that kind of stuff. So, but it does look cool, and I can appreciate all of them. And I think I think we're seeing overcorrection. We went to giant tails, and they were everywhere, and everybody had them. And now we're seeing a lot more of the round tail and spear tail stuff. And then I think after like 3 to 5 years of that, we're gonna go back to giant tails. So we usually covet what we can't have or don't have yet. Ooh, I haven't seen those. I'm gonna get those. Pretty soon, everyone will have short-tailed guppies, and that's gonna be like, who's got the biggest tailed guppies on the planet? I need those now. So, can you line breed to build up that muscle? Yeah, you can. Part of it's genetics, and then also part of it is not letting the tail get too big. Same thing happens in angelfish, actually, where you get that double veil tail gene where the fins start getting so long as adults that it's detrimental. And so you want like a single tail or a single long fin gene that gives them more of a medium gene length or fin length that helps them out more. And so, yes, you can isolate traits and kind of work towards that, I would say. And mostly what I do is I just look for like, okay, I've got 5 males. These guys all have like skinny muscle. This one's got a big one. I'm gonna use that as a breeder. And then they'll breed out and you go, okay, well, half of them are getting that bigger muscle kind of back there. Great. Let's keep working on that. Where usually I don't find this a problem in the females because we're not breeding for super big tails and stuff like that. We're usually going for big, robust females anyway. And so when you look at your male and your female guppies, you're going to be like, wow, a lot of times the female tail part, like that muscle, is just twice as big as the male, even though they don't have to carry that big tail. So we know that the genetics can basically do it, but so often with the males, we're selecting so much for color, tail shape, patterns, all of those things, that if there's a list of 10 traits, size of tail muscle is like number 10, or body size might have been 7. And when I'm talking about monster guppies, really what I'm saying is I want to make like body size number 1, tail size, like tail muscle number 2. Then we can work on colors and stuff. But the focus will be bigger, more robust guppies. And I kind of keep thinking about it and I go, if I was to rank all the traits, it might be bigger, better tail muscle, disease resistant, cooler water, then get some colors and patterns and stuff. Like those come after making a guppy that you can shake a stick at and it doesn't, it just shrugs it off. It's like, 'cause I'm fine. Then make them look good. And if you get all of that going, you got something really special there. So maybe in 5-7 years, maybe there's a Corey guppy of like, that thing's just built like a tank. Like, yep, Corey's tank guppies. They got genetics. Let's see here. Curved backs is a combo of genetics and nutrition. Yeah, it can be either or both and all of that. Yep, that's definitely true. It can also be damage. You can also have a fish that swims into the side of the tank so hard that it actually can break its back. Yeah, people don't realize that disease resistance is a trait you can breed for. It doesn't seem like you should be able to, but you can. And so it's the same thing like not to get too like COVID or anything like that, but there's diseases that hit humans. Like why doesn't, like the plague can roll through and you're like, wait, it wiped out 99% of your town and these people lived? Like when those people mate, likely at least half of their babies will inherit that trait and they can't be taken out by the plague. And so if we know we have these common diseases, like maybe Colmenares and maybe ick and maybe a common fungus, if you can take, let's say you have 1,000 guppies that you've bred up and 200 of them live through ick, and then you take those 200 and you breed them back up to 1,000, and then you give them a fungal infection and you whittle down to 200, and then you breed those back up, right? And then you introduce those to ick again, and you're going, wow, okay, we kept 700 out of 1,000. Like, oh, that's looking a lot better. You breed those back up. And you can keep doing that until you can basically get fish that will shrug off a lot. Now, there's only so much you can do. You can't just like, why wouldn't we just make all fish impervious to disease? Like, well, there's still like stress factors like water quality and overcrowding and disease mutation. And you might be able like, well, I can make it resistant to these 5 funguses or this one fungus and ick type of deal. So you can't just always create the best thing, but if you know that one of the stress factors is getting too cold and you can solve for that, well, now they're less likely to get ick because the stronger a fish is health-wise, the less likely it is. Diseases, for the most part, are opportunistic. And so it attacks the weaker fish first. And if you can get stronger and stronger fish, you have less likely for them to take on disease. So, if they got to put a lot of energy to carrying a giant tail, that energy does not get diverted towards fighting off parasites and disease and making slime coat and doing these things. So, yeah, that's gonna be something fun to play with. I've been on a huge Guppy YouTube watching spree. This is a sign. Yeah, I basically made a decision without any else my company. I go, if you're paying me to do it, if my company is paying me to do it, you should buy our dechlorinator and our plants and do all that stuff. And if it's like Corey is now after hours, he worked all day, he was in meetings, and he wants to be in his fish room, what does he want to do? Corey wants to play with guppies and lion bears. So naturally, I'm going to do that, and that's going to bleed over into my work. So if you're into that, you're going to love it. If you're not into that, you're going to hate it. Let's see. There was a Michael Fishroom comment. Here we go. Hey, Corey, I got a pair of gorgeous red dragons from Michael's Fishroom. She dropped 2 batches of fry 8 and 4 weeks ago. No kidding. No male babies, 60 plus females. That is not a common thing. I don't know. That could be a genetic thing. Stuff like that happens where isn't it one of the, I believe one of the swordtail genes is lethal. I think that's what happens. I think if you take, even if you can get, if I remember right without brushing up, if you take a hyphen male and a hyphen female swordtail, you breed them together, the gene is lethal. So that's why you have to take like a normal male and a hyphen female to breed them together, and then they'll be viable. So you could have something, snuck away in those genes on those red dragons that basically means whatever this combo is, that it would be lethal to the way the genes come out on a male. And on one hand, you'd be like, that'd be super beneficial if you were a breeder and you knew that. You would sell a lot of fish and no one could get into your territory. But also it could be they just don't know either. Or something completely like you've got one, so of the pair you got, maybe your one fish has that genetic, just that right amount of genes, and the male has the right amount of genes that is making it so you're not getting what you need. Could be a lot of weird stuff that goes on there. So the first thing I would do at this point, now that you're 8 weeks in and not a single male, I would find yourself like another pair of red dragons from a different source, add them in, and just see what you can get going. That's what I would do personally. It could be the same though. And I would try to go like, where do I think Michael's Fishroom's getting his guppies? Can you find the breeder down the block that's had them for 2 years already and get a pair of his? A local store, something to diversify, I would hope. So like with my guppies, the golds, I got them from Dan's Fish, and I'm importing them myself from a specific farm in Indonesia. My hope is that those two are going to be different, and I can play with the genetics then. So if you start with a trio, how long would you let the line go before introducing genetics? If you're already answered, I'll rewatch. Me personally, if I get a pair of fish, a trio, whatever it is, and I love the way they look, and I'm going, wow, this is great. These fish are gorgeous, right? So I can use an example of like the Vienna guppies. I think I brought 6 fish back originally, 2 males, 4 females, and that's usually my go-to. If I can buy that, that's what I'll buy. And we've introduced no new genetics because no one that I know of has brought them in out of Europe again. But they're still totally viable. And so you'll get people that the more times you outcross, technically the stronger your fish will get genetically, but usually the further they'll get away from what you want them to look like. So you get this like, which one am I trying to do? And being that I don't have an option, so it's not like I can just go, oh, now I have more genetics that I can mix in. Because that's not an option, I'd have to travel, I'd have to bring them in the country, it's a big burden. I just go with the other way of like, I'll just keep this one strain and keep working with it. And maybe someone else will outcross it with something else. Like if I was going to do that, and I'm not, but if I was like, this is going to be my thing, I'm doing it for the next 10 years, I would probably outcross Vienna guppies with tiger endlers to mix up the genetics and then keep breeding towards what I consider the Vienna guppy to be. So that's what I would do. Love the new shirt? Well, thank you. You can buy it at aquariumcoop.com. I love planet tanks and guppies. Can I talk about yin-yang guppies? I don't know that I know what yin-yang guppies are. Yin-yang guppies. I might just know them as another thing. Here it is, a yin yang guppy. I see. So on Petco, this is just a white male guppy and a black male guppy. So if it's that, they're just, yes, there are white and there are black and there are pink and there are basically almost every solid color exists now. A yin yang guppy is just them selling specific males. Here's a new white yin yang guppy. Let me look at this on Fish Lore. It's just a complete white one. Yeah, those. So like I've got some white or platinum as they call them a lot of times. Balloon mollies on the way that I'm paying way too much money for. But yeah, seeing on TikTok, they're just white and black guppies that have been line bred for those. Yeah, and the white guppies look great. I've thought about carrying them or keeping them and breeding them before, but yeah, just two different fish together makes a yin yang. Just marketing, yeah, as Kyle says. Yep, exactly. Let's see here. I've never kept them before. What parameters do they need? If we're talking about guppies, I find they do best in a pH of 7.2 to 8, anywhere in there. I like lots of minerals. I've kept them as hard as I can get it here with the well water, and they seem to thrive. With less minerals, they do okay too, just as long as they don't have none. There might be a point with like, oh man, at 10,000 hardness, that's an inhibitor. I don't have a way to test that. So, and then when it comes to temperatures, I find that most guppies are doing well at 78 to 80. And my goal is to force them to live at what I want. So, like in my monster guppy tank, you'll see like, hey, you lost some. Like, yep, I put meds through them, I cleaned them up, and they're living at 73 degrees. Like, they 100% will do better if I keep them hotter, because in the countries they're being bred, which is mostly tropical countries, they're used to that. So the minute I get them here and I go, no, you got to live at a lesser, they're more susceptible to disease and things. And so my goal, I would love it to actually get a guppy that's going to handle 65 just fine. But I got to breed them up, and I got to subject them to these things to make it happen. And right now, I've just started with very few guppies, and I think I got down to about 4 adults, and now the population's bigger than it was when I originally bought them because they had lots of babies and stuff. So that's one other thing I love about guppies is you can afford. It sounds weird. You can lose some by getting them cleaner and just getting them adapted to your water and all that, and they will make more. So you could buy a trio, and in shipping they arrive alive, but over the next week and a half you lose 2 of them and you got 1 female left, and you're going, oh dang it. But then that female releases 40 fry, and now you have 41. Like, you're back in the game. That's what I like about them. So always kind of pushing forward, and your odds are in your favor, I would say, is really that's what I love about them. Let's see here. Any tips on trying to crossbreed different guppies? Mostly it would be the patience. Get yourself like a 10-gallon, put the male and female you want in there, raise them up, and then when you raise them up, they probably won't look very good. Like, it's going to be a smattering of a bunch of stuff. You actually need to pick the fish out of there with the traits you want, breed those in a 10-gallon, and those may start having traits that are like, okay, we're starting to get some uniformity going. Okay, there's 20 this way, 20 this way, and 20 this way. And you can keep working on that to identify where you want to take it. But if you just take a guppy here and a guppy there and you make them, you'll just get here's a bunch of stuff. So, for the most part. If you were to get very specific lines, like if you take a black Moscow guppy and you breed it to a green Moscow guppy, well, that's used as the normal outcross. And what that means is you've got greens, and if you just breed green the whole time, eventually they'll get weak. It's known that you outcross them to the black Moscow to strengthen the genes again. So they're always carrying some of that black Moscow gene. So if you go and you take a male from one and a female from the other, when you do breed them, they'll be pretty uniform. And that's standard for like the purples as well. There's quite a few of those guppies that use, like the darker ones like that, use that Moscow as the outcross. At what age do they become too old to have babies still? I don't know that I've really been able to watch that happen. I think that my guppies are always kind of still putting out babies, but I think the batches get smaller. So it's like, oh, so they might start life with like, hey, that batch was 12, and then 22, and then 42, and then 52, and then 52, and then 52, and then 42, and then 32, and then 22, and then 12, and then eventually they die of old age. I But usually I'm colony breeding them and things, so I don't really I don't get to watch one guppy its whole life cycle and go, oh, what age do they stop? Normally, if you're line breeding, you've already moved on to other females anyway, so you wouldn't know. You would just sell it off, and someone else is going to learn that, but they won't know exactly how old it is. So it would take someone doing specific studying, which Dr. Wallstad did, or as has been doing, to see how long will this fish just even live, and then how long is it viable. So that's something that I haven't taken under with guppies that I've been playing with. So can I recommend a book on genetics or recommend crosses for guppy morphs? I don't think I have a great recommendation. A lot of the books have gotten so expensive and no one's making them. It's a great book to read, like Stan Schubel. Let me see, Stan Schubel. I think, is it Bel? Yeah. So, yeah, The Proper Care of Guppies, printed in 1995, which that's a long time ago now. Is that coming up on 30 years? Yeah, because this book's almost 30 years old, by Stan Schubel. You could buy it on, and I'll link it here, because he did like a TFH, like real, what do I want to call it, like a 20-page book. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. This book is fairly thick, and to buy like a used copy, the link's too long, it won't let me do it. But if you look up Stan Schubel, The Proper Care of Guppies, like on Amazon, you can look other places too. They're buying it used starts at about $80, which is nutty to pay for a book. It's 256 pages, but what I would say, and I think I've said this in the past, those 256 pages, you're buying 40 years of someone's passion of guppies into what did they find works. These temperatures, these foods, these methods, these strains. And Stan Schubel literally has guppies named after him, so you can buy Stan Schubel guppies, and that's where you're going to see things like steak endlers and all that. Those names are attached to these fish from these people that were amazing for their time. For a long time, I was keeping a lot of these strains back before I was on YouTube, because I just thought it was like what do I want to call it, like an homage to them. So here there's a video on IFGA, so International Fancy Guppy Association, red delta guppies that were cross between Stan Schubel and Luke Roebuck lines. So old school breeders. Updates on Stan Schubel's blue delta guppies, right? And so Delta American green guppies, Stan Schubel line. And so when you start seeing these things out there, and then you can basically read the book about what makes a Stan Schubel guppy. And then was he doing disease resistance? Was he, did he pioneer this? Did he invent this guppy? And so if you're a super guppy nerd, I think it's worth the $80. But if you're not, and you got to want to read too, it's a dry book. You're reading genetics, you're reading, it ain't a picture book. It's 256, and you'll see I'm using undergraduate filters. This, you got to take it in for what was the time period. Is this, he was in his heyday in the 70s and 80s? When was it? So, but I don't have a great resource to be like, hey, it used to be guppies.com, but unfortunately the guy that owned that website just let it die, which is a shame. Let's see. I'm going to click on this and see if that's weird. Let's see. Not sure if I'm allowed to post here, but I just found a free PDF of the Stan Schubel book you were talking about. Can I link it here? Yeah, I think so. I don't know. For all I know, it could have been created to a free resource. Publishers do that. If I find out specifically it's been done illegally, that would suck. But for the most part, I think people that make books originally do so to make some money, and then he may have passed on now. By now, I'm not sure, but usually a big portion of doing anything, like why do I do YouTube videos? Yeah, I got to make money, but it's to pass on knowledge and stuff, or stuff that I've learned. That's originally why I started YouTube. Is I just wanted to. The original YouTube thing before I really even had a store was I'm gonna build a fish room, and I can't figure out how to do it from forum posts because people don't take good pictures and there's no videos on it. I will do that, and then it blossomed into this over time. So I think usually they start out with they start out with wanting to share what they've learned over their life, and then if they can make some money along with it too, that's a great bonus. And so, yeah, I think at this point, a lot of times when I meet authors or something like that, and they're like, it's like Chris Lukup, his magazines go for hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and it's ridiculous to him. He wanted it to be accessible. It's $10 for the magazine or the book, and to see them going for thousands sometimes is against the whole reason he did the book. Dave's asking, what is this? That's a super chat, Dave. You can spend money if you want, and it makes a bigger message that's more noticed. Yeah, that's what that is. Yeah, another reminder of how alarmingly fast time passes as we get older. Yeah. My wife and I just watched The Matrix at the movie theater this week. Yeah, it was this week, and it was the 25th year anniversary of it. Awesome to see, by the way. It holds its own in the theater again. And it left me going, why don't we make better movies nowadays? Like, there are good movies nowadays, but just to see it and you're like, wow, this is 25 years ago. Graphics, storyline, everything held up pretty well. Like, in terms of, like, there's a lot of movies that come out that are strictly just worse. Like, Matrix #1 held up pretty good. Pretty good. Have I thought about writing a book one day? Yes. Chris Lukup encourages me to do it all the time. I'm convinced I would have to uh, uh, basically get out of what I'm doing. I'd have to take a year off and let my brain detoxify from YouTube and video making and all of that, because I just instantly want to go. It's better and easier to show in a video than it is to write a book. And then, yeah, there's probably some kind of book at some point in my life, maybe if I'm up to it. And then whether anyone will want to read it, I have no idea. I don't know what book I would write and all of that, but it's a lost art, and I don't think I'm good at this art, by the way. So, just because I make 1,000 videos, book #1 is probably terrible. Yeah, I'll lean on friends and can you make this better? Can you help? What am I doing wrong? But you get better when you do something, and I've never written a book before, so I'm not, yeah. Let's see here. On the topic of guppies and temperature, I have thousands with a founding population 100% from the store, and I've kept them outside as low as the upper 50s for a few weeks, and they survive. Nice. That's good. I honestly think that is a good thing to be working on as a hobby. And when you watch my Breeding Fish for Profit series, if you ever watch those types of videos, I think those are the things that you can say about your fish, right? If you were to say, hey, these guppies do fine at 65, here's a group, and keep them at 65 and they have luck, they're going to want to buy your guppies more than import ones that aren't as hardy, right? And so the more of these things that we can get back into fish, we've lost these things. We've gained every color combo, every body combo, every tail combo imaginable, and we've lost disease resistance, temperature resistance, and some of these other, size, all these kinds of things. We've lost some of this. And so I think that there is some room for better fish there with home hobbyist breeding, home breeders that make it a priority again. Let's see here. Yeah, I'll write books with my spare time, which I just don't have at the moment. I've tried a little bit. I tried working on a book with Chris, and I'm convinced, and not that I've ever done it before. I'm convinced you need like, hey, there's 3 or 6 months of my life that my work is the book, not let me try and fit this in around work. That has not been working out well for me at all. But if it was like, okay, I've got 6 months, or some time period of like, oh, I need to make the book, and that's the big thing. There's a chance that could get done, but I'm not in a spot where I can just disappear from YouTube for 6 months or a year, right? That would, on the hopes that the book when it came out would be a big enough, like, oh, does it bring enough revenue and all that stuff that we lost out while I did this? At the moment, no. So I need someone to fill in my shoes, be the host of the show, run the company, do all these things, and then it's like, okay, I could focus on a book, and then maybe it would be good. That just because I focus on it doesn't mean it'd be good. So you never know. I no longer have time for books. I get audio books. Yeah, it's hard to find the time for me. I enjoy it, but it's hard to find the time. Is there guppy finish that sells better than another? It depends on who you're making it for. But in general, the more colorful and the bigger a fish is, the more it sells in a store. And most of the hobby is driven by store sales. So big fancy tail, lots of color, means kids and adults are picking it out going, I want that one, I want that one, I want that one. When you get like a little round tail, I go, ooh, that's going to be a nice fish. I want to breed and keep that and play with that. But the average person, no. So if you were to ask like a fancy guppy with like a cobra with a bunch of color, with a Spanish dancer type tail with a lot of color on it, that will sell probably 10 to 1 to a red guppy or something, like just a solid color. So the more color and the bigger tail, the better for just general retail sales, in my opinion. It's the same reason why you sell more cherry shrimp than you do red willy shrimp, because the red willy shrimp are just a worse version of a cherry shrimp to the average person. Spent my summer break as a teacher to write my dart frog book. Nice. See that I romanticize that of like, yeah, maybe I'll take a summer and I'll do that. And then it's been 5 years later, I'm like, yeah, I don't have time for that. I still don't have time for that. So sounds awesome, but I hope to be able to do that at some point. Well, you never know. How I turned the hobby into a successful, roaring, million business at this point. That's a book you could write. You could tell the story way down the road. I do believe that's the book that I actually think it's much easier to write, like almost like a biography or what you did and how you got it done, than about a different subject that there's still wiggle room, because there's no wiggle room in like, yeah, I almost went out of business when the store flooded. But when you go, oh, I believe this is the best way to feed fish, there's lots of wiggle room there. Like, oh, you're wrong. You can't really be like, no, you're not wrong. You didn't get down to just a couple $100 in the bank. And you're like, no, that's just fact. So it's easier to write a book like that and just hopefully bring in maybe a little bit of my humor and trials and tribulations, and then mix in a little bit of, here's my best guess, here's where I went wrong, I would have never done that again, flu ball's still tripping, don't waste your time here or there, any of those type of things. But we're getting too far off guppies. I'm here to talk guppies. We've got an hour in guppies, and we did 2.5 hours before this talking anything. So yeah. Alec says super veil angels crossed with standard fin yields 100% veil tail angels. Homozygous high fin swordtails and platies are lethal, but Charles Clapsaddle and someone else had variations of platies that bred 100%. Yeah, there are two. I can't remember her name, but there was the one woman like in the 50s that developed the original high fin on a swordtail. And then I believe Greg Sage on his My Eye sores created a different one. It took him many, many years. That was completely isolated and not related to hers at all. So it was a natural occurring variant that he line bred out. But yes, so there are, and when I say that, like these are lethal genes and stuff, it's of the genes we have to work with. If someone in their basement isolates a gene, like let's say the example is getting kind of nerdy, but imagine you're just breeding guppies in your house and you got no outside influence. And one day, right, for the easiest sake of example here, an albino shows up. So imagine you got wild caught guppies and they're in your house, and 5 years down the road, one albino shows up. And you go, wow, I like the way that looks. And you specifically breed that albino, right? And you're working with that, but you find out that if you breed that albino with a red fish, the fry always die. So then you breed that albino with blue fish and they live fine, right? But as you sell those fish and everyone goes, yeah, when you try to breed it to a red fish, it always dies. Yep, that's just the way the genetics work on that one. But if you have somebody on the other side of the world and in their fish room, they got wild caught fish and they worked and they got an albino and they bred that albino, but it breeds fine to red fish. And actually, maybe it's lethal with blue. Those are two different, unique ones. Now, a lot of times, if you buy from the person where the fish died from the red, and you breed that, it's really hard to get it to not be lethal with red. But if you get it with the other guy or girl, super easy. And so that's where, like, in the last 70 years of fish keeping, there are two versions of high fin for swordtails. How many billions of fish have ever been made in swordtails, and yet there's two strains of it ever. And so probably any high fin you've ever had your hands on, 99.9% have been from Dr. I want to say Lyazol, Dr. Let me see. Who invented high fin swordtail gene? Let's see here. Will it tell me? I have a hard time. Yep, so Select Aquatics did it with this high fin Mai, but who was the woman that did it first? Dr. Joanne Norton is the first person that created the high fin fancy Xiphosphoros, which is just the scientific name for a swordtail. And that, let's see, that happened, became a show standard in the late 80s and early 90s. So, yeah, and then there's whole, like, Illinois State Academic of Science, variable expression of high fin. So it was, they were using it for genetics and stuff. And so you can get super nerdy into it, but you got to think about it. Two variations, like, ever? Like, so I'm sure there's some that's happened that never just got recognized or something, but two made it and became notable and famous enough that people knew there was two distinct lines, but that's very rare. Let's see here. For those of you who wish to see and read the TFH publication Stan Schubel created, I found it in the Internet Archive. Awesome. Yeah. Do I think GMO will bring supersized, disease-resistant guppies? Not unless it becomes marketable. Like glowfish, for instance, right? We already established that what do people buy when they go into a store? Bigger and colorful. And so glowfish makes it more colorful. People buy it. That's a genetically modified fish. And could we do that to make them bigger? Sure, but bigger kind of goes against small tanks, which is what most people have. And so could you make it to be supersized and disease resistant? You could, but the unfortunate part is disease resistant isn't necessarily good for the industry. What do you mean, Corey? Well, when a glowfish gets sick, you go and spend $20 on medicine trying to save its life, which was more than the glowfish. So it's not really in the best interest of the retail business to have a disease-resistant fish, when I think for the hobby and everything we should, because more people that don't have disease stay in the hobby longer, which would spend more money with retailers. So it depends on who's buying the fish and whether they would actually want it to be more hardy or not. There are people that, there's manufacturer work with like, oh, well, when the thing breaks, you sell them another one. Like, that's not the answer, buddy. We want it to last longer. And so it depends on who's the buyer. A new natural color shirt with a guppy or Murphy? Yeah, I mean, shirts they don't really make us money, but we like to put them out from time to time. And now that our warehouse is bigger, we can do this more. Shirts in general, like when we launch a product, like let's say this one, there's just one section for it. When you launch a shirt, it's like, oh, it's 7 different sizes. It's 7 sections. So clothing, because they have all the sizes, take up a lot of space in a warehouse. So now we've got more space. We can play with that some more. When experts talk about swordtails, they're including platies by default. Is there a distinction implied? Depends. Like scientific papers, there is a distinction. Just like a professional breeder or something, probably not much. Like in the breeding world, really think about platies bring the color, swordtails bring the sword. And so if you want a red swordtail but you don't care about a sword, just get a red platy, right? That they're basically kind of the same fish. A female swordtail versus like a male platy, they look real similar, honestly. If you ask someone got someone off the street and we're like, hey, which one do you like better? And they're like, I don't know, they're both red, they look kind of the same. You're like, yeah, they do. But if you add one with a sword, they're gonna be like, ooh, that sword thing looks kind of cool. Yeah, it kind of does. So they are different, and not all Zoophosphorus carry large swords. So there's that too. Yeah. Can you say more about slowly acclimating guppies to cooler water? If you already did, I'll listen again. I didn't really speak about that. It's not, you don't just acclimate them, like you don't just take them home and be like, cool, you need to live in 40-degree water. You need to like get the guppies, be breeding them, and then you start turning the water temperature down. And so maybe you get it down to 70 and you're like, ooh, disease is happening. They're not looking so good. And then you let that roll that way for like 3 months or more. And then as you get down, you're like, yep, they're still having babies. And the babies that will raise up and survive that, they're now accustomed to being at that temperature. And then over time you go, well, you were doing that at 70. Let's see how you do at 68. And then you let that go for 3, 6, 8 months, something like that. And you get more and more going and going and going. And then you keep repeating that until eventually there's a hard stop where it's like, look, guppies ain't living at 32 degrees. But maybe you can, like the person that had them here down in the 50s, maybe you can get them into the 40s. Maybe. At a certain point, like we probably can't make a human that can just survive 36 degrees all the time. Like the body won't do it. But we could probably, like just like we can have a human that can survive really hot, like stupid hot, we could probably have a human that can survive like, oh, they could handle mid-50s all the time, though. It's technically possible. I'm working with some platinum Dumbo red-tailed guppies, and the males grow out. All the males look out growing the same, but some of the females have different colored tails. Is that normal? That's fairly normal because people focus on the males and they'll let the females. The females a lot of times are an afterthought. They're only looking at males because that's what get entered into shows and what people buy. Rarely are they buying females unless they look really, really good based on the female. So yeah, it's just not as set there. So if it were me and you were, let's say there's 2 different tails coming out and you go, I like this one and I don't like that one so much. Great. Stop breeding that one. Like keep selling that one off. Take it to the store, take it to friends, whatever. Just keep breeding the one you like. And eventually that'll be more and more and more and more common. And the one you don't like will be less and less and less and less common when they breed. Yeah, once fish get in the low 60s, they start swimming pretty slow. Yep. And you'll hit periods where fish can no longer breed when they're that cold. So you actually, you need them to survive at 60 or 58 or whatever. And then when it warms up, and really, I would say it's probably not so much about how low can we take a fish. And instead, I would say what you're really shooting for is, can we develop a fish that doesn't need a heater in the average person's home? So if your home gets down to 65 at night, you really only need a fish that can live at 65. And maybe it warms up during the day. That would be fine. You don't, every degree below 65 you go, there's going to be a smaller and smaller market that would need that. And you'd be like, yeah, but I want to keep them outside. Cool. You and the other 27 people on the planet want that. Most people don't care. And you could work on getting ones that can live outside over winter all year round, and that'd be cool. Do it. But for the most part, what we're looking to do is if I could keep it in my house and my thermostat's set to 67, let's say, and my fish just always did well, sounds like I've accomplished a great goal for a lot of people. And then for me, I would work on how do I get them bigger? How do I make them more resistant? How do I get better color? How do I make them dance? How do I make them look better? Anything else. Because you can get a fish where it's like, this fish is crazy. Like there's self-cloning killifish and another fish. Like, oh, that's super weird and cool. Oh, they don't really look like anything cool though, so no one keeps them. Like they have this really cool behavior, but nobody really wants them. So at some point you can be like, this guppy can freeze solid, but it has no color, and people be like, cool, don't want it. So you at some point you get as much as you can out of that coolness or temperature, but you gotta have the color, you gotta have it look good, you gotta have all the other things people want. So, it's kind of like making food. You could make something super duper healthy, but no one wants to eat it. You could also make something amazingly good, but it's bad for you. The goal is to find what's in the middle. Tastes really good and good for you? Yeah, that's what you're working towards. I've had a few survive outside because I couldn't catch all the fry. Yeah, that's how I first started doing it. When I first got into kind of summer tubbing, is I intentionally would always try and leave out some fry to see like how cold could they have gone? Could I have left them out longer next year? And I breed them inside and I do all that, and then I try to leave them out longer the following year. My thought was maybe after like 10 years, I'd have some fish that can go pretty darn cool. That'd be good for me. For most times, I would say I'm trying to do what I think I want, and then my goals align with somebody else on the planet. And maybe they'll want to buy them, and that would be fine. But I focus on what do I want first, because it can be years of your life working on this. You got to get up on your Saturday and catch the fish and feed them and do the thing and all of that during the summer and the winter and all those times. So if you're not into it, probably it's not going to pan out. If you're just chasing, it's the same reason I don't have like tons of African cichlids or stingrays or other stuff. Like if I'm not into them, it doesn't make sense to make videos about them, to sell them. They would all make me money, but it won't make sense. Like there's no reason I should have these longfin rosy barbs in this tank. I could put almost anything else, and yet I have the rosy barbs because I love them. They look cool, and they're making me happy for the last month and a half. And if they're making me happy for another 3 months, great. And if I hate them in 6 months, I'll put them in a different tank or take them to the store. Do what makes you happy. Used to be that most guppies lived in room temperature. Yes. Too many IFGA male guppies look like diptail pencilfish. Yeah, they can't hold their tails, so they're doing this move of like, I can almost swim like a normal fish. Yeah. Breeding standards and just what people think look cool and that kind of stuff all matters. Ooh, Alex says, Thelma Simpson developed Simpson high-fin swordtails in SoCal. Dr. Diana Norton, I can't even say this word, elucidate? Yeah, elucidate genetics of angelfish and swordtails and platies in her basement in Iowa. 2 housewives did great things. Yes. I think I knew that there was another woman who had worked on it as well, but I wasn't confident in a name, and I wasn't sure if it was just multiple people researching or if one person or 2 people invented the gene. Yeah, but I would say the takeaway part is a woman or 2 in their basement fish rooms developed a thing that the world has used for many, 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 many years now, and we are all that basement hobbyist. That person could literally be you if you put your time and energy towards it. Most of us, we just approach it from, I'm going to keep some cool fish and I'm just going to buy what's cool. And I do that too. But there are some people that go, I want to work on this one specific thing till I know it in and out. And that's a different breed of person, really. Corey, my guppies have not been doing so well. They seem to get thin and have frayed tails. I've treated for fin rot and antibacterial, but no luck. Any recommendations? I would make sure that your pH is high enough, you've got enough minerals, and then I would use lots of salt. you might go, oh, it's going to kill my plants. Like, all right, set up a quarantine tank and add salt, fight off a bunch of that stuff. You don't really know what's wrong with them. Get them to be healthy. Get some babies in your water and start raising those up and see if you can't get them to be healthier and healthier, and then work with them from there. Sometimes, what if they want to be at 85 degrees with crazy hard water and you don't have that? What if at the farm they were raised in brackish water and you don't have that? What if they've got a microscopic parasite you can't identify? There's all these what ifs. And so at some point you just got to start taking, like, okay, well, you tried antibiotics, didn't fix it. Okay, let's move on to something else. Give it another try. And that's why it works out so well when you can find a local breeder or something and you can go and you'd be like, wow, they're really thriving there. And my water's similar to yours. When I brought them home, they seem to do well. Yeah. I've definitely got some female standard guppies over 2 inches before. Is that considered large? I don't think that would be very large. I feel like it's at least that big, but it's mostly like it's the girth and just like how big and chunky they are. It's one of those, like, you kind of know it when you see it. I don't know how to really, because I'm not like, every time I see a guppy, I'm not pulling out a tape measure and measuring it and weighing it. You know when you're going, wow, those are big. That's how you know it. How many guppies should I start with in a 75? I don't know, like 8, 2 males, 6 females. But honestly, you're kind of better off starting with a group of that in like a 10-gallon, getting some batches out of them, and then putting them in. Too often, so here's the problem that I run into, and I basically have proven this a billion times at this point. Like 8 or 10 guppies in this tank will not do well because I can't get the plant stuff dense enough for them to really do well. Now, I can do that in a 10-gallon tank because I can get really dense plants, and now I have 400 guppies. And if I put 400 guppies in here, still plants won't be dense enough. So it's really critical to have super duper 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 dense hiding places for the guppies to really make a bunch and have them do well. That's really hard to do the bigger the tank gets. And so honestly, I've thought a lot about it. Like, why do I keep failing with these 40 breeders and I look terrible? It's because I buy 4 to 6 fish and I put them in there and I go, yeah, but I can breed them. And I've bred these things a million times before. But I was always doing it in smaller tanks with denser plants and everything. And so when you go to fill a 40 breeder full of plants, it might be $300-$400 to get them dense enough to raise the fry. Instead, I go, well, here's a few Anubias, here's a few Crips, here's a few of this. That'll probably work. And maybe 3 years later, it'll grow in and maybe it would be enough. But between now and then, it doesn't work out. I'm disappointed. I lose interest. And so the smaller the tank with the more decor, the more success I find that I have. And every time I try to go, well, I'll put them in a bigger pond or a bigger tank, or I'll start with 5 guppies in a 200-gallon. It doesn't work out because I don't have the infinite cover they want to really get them to explode. So that's what I'm looking for. So was wondering for help with fungus infection in my tank. Well, if you just have general fungus, you don't know what it is, treat with an antibiotic, Maricin and Icex. That combo, usually take it out. If you don't have luck after that, go with salt at like a tablespoon per gallon in a quarantine tank if you have live plants in the main tank. Nothing wrong with breeding for profit, but I keep what I like and I share what I can. Me too. I mean, there are times when I definitely will like breed something that I know everybody else will want because I think I want to help the hobby. But for the most part, it makes no sense for all the wild livebearers I keep, trout goodeids and other stuff where people are just like, ugh. And I'm like, yeah, but they're cool, right? And they're like, yeah, I guess. So I would, if you have to make your rent on it, you got to be what other people want. Most people don't have to make their rent on it. So you can find a nice little side hustle of like, yeah, people want the fish I make. That's fun. And I get to do what I want. That's fun too. And then at the end of the month, you're like, hey, I bought another pair of $100 guppies because people bought the stuff I like. Good. That's all I'm ever trying to do is like, I have to use monetary dollars to get the things I want. But the goal is honestly, well, if I make 20 of these, can I have some of those? And if the answer is yes, All right, I like it. And some people go, no, it's 500 of those for one of mine. Like, okay, I guess I better sell that. I never understand when there's like people will breed a Corridora and they're like, this Corridora is $400 each. And you're like, uh-huh, you're that's just scarcity pricing. Like that doesn't make sense. I'm convinced that fish pricing with like live bears and stuff, getting 30, 50, $60 a pair or trio or whatever, that's enough to start covering shipping and losses and other stuff to get more fish to keep it going. Really, live bears like killifish and stuff like that, just a big network of people who enjoy these fish, trying to make sure they can keep them fed and cleaned and spread them around. Money has to change hands because you've got yellow guppies and you've got red guppies and I've got black guppies, but I want this one, but you don't want black, but you do want those ones. And so if I give you money, you can buy those ones and I get the yellows that I wanted. That's really all that's happening there. So for me anyway, that's what I try to have. And so a lot of times, even though I spend, like my goal is like, oh, these, like I literally am bringing in, I think 6 fish that are like, I think $60 a piece. My goal is to sell them for $30 a pair. And like, yep, a bunch of people are going to get them. They're going to breed a ton of them and then everybody will have them. And then pretty soon they're $20 a pair. And like, yeah, that's fine. More people will have the fish. I got the fish I wanted. That's all I care about. Perfect. Let's see here. Okay, we got about half an hour left. Good. Want to make sure I'm losing track of time, being that I streamed twice. It seems like I've been okay. Know where I'm at here. How do we handle people with jealousy? Do you have more context or an example of that, Ben? I mean that does happen where you'll get like you'll have something that other people want and like people got angry when I wouldn't ship them Vienna guppies. Like, well, I'm not, and they would offer big money. It's like, that's not, I bring a fish in so I can enjoy it. And then they go to my store. You can fly in, you can wait till someone else and that. But, jealousy, I get jealous too. Like, oh, wow, that tank looks so cool. I want that. Like, that's a normal part of the hobby. Are guppy contests a thing? Never really heard about them before. Yeah. So there's the ALA convention, there's the IFGA, which is the International Fancy Guppy Association, and you can enter your guppies in different classes, and there's standards for them, just like betas and other stuff. There's also like bowl shows, and yeah, I mean, pretty much anything in life you can make competitive. I've never entered any of those because I probably haven't had a fish good enough, to be honest, and then two, to me, it's not about winning that award. It's about, do I like the fish? And I focus on that. And so I might make a fish that like would score worse on a chart, but might be the way I like the fish better. So I want to keep that fish. Once adult guppies get accustomed to fry in their tank, they tend to eat fewer newborn fry. Yeah, the more around, the more they're used to it, and not like, so let's say you've never had a pet in your house. If you see, if a cat in there, you might be like, what was that? Oh, it's a cat, right? And then you go, oh yeah, it's a cat. I forgot about that. Like you're just house sitting or something. But pretty soon you've had a cat for, a few months and you're like, yeah, the cat's moving. Don't worry about it. And this fish kind of the same way. Like, yeah, there's fry. That's what they do. They swim around. It's fine. I found a 2.5-inch female guppy. Talk about a monster. Awesome. I'm still waiting to find more monsters to maybe add to my mix and make some more monsters. Half of it is just feed really well, change good water, start those fish young. But the other half is finding some genetics that they're physically going to have a higher ceiling if you treat them right. So Ben says, for example, if you know cycling and a mature tank is important, but because you dislike someone, you say it isn't important, like flipping what you believe. So let me think here. I'm trying to put context to that. So how do you handle people with jealousy? If you know cycling and mature tank is important, but you dislike someone, so you say it isn't important, like flipping. So I see what you're saying. So like misinformation. So like, for instance, let's say you and I were both breeding the same guppy, and I'm jealous of what you've got going. So I say like, yeah, you don't have to do cycling and all of this, and they should do fine. And then when they buy your guppy, they don't have luck. You're saying something like that, maybe. I'm still not quite. I know if you were sitting here like you were, a month or two ago, we'd. Oh yeah, I know what you're saying now. Yeah, um, yeah. I mean, we've had it happen a million times. I've watched people call us out on a product and then launch that product later. We have competitors that do that to us of like, oh, their XYZ kills ABC. Like, no, it doesn't. And then to watch them launch the same product from the same manufacturer, magically not a problem anymore. Oh, turns out when you make money off it, not a problem anymore? I see. Jealousy leading to someone to disagree with someone to make them sound wrong. Yeah, that happens. Yep. It's unfortunately that happens. And so okay, the original question was how do you deal with it? The way I deal with it is I ignore them. Because getting into a fight, let's say you've got, let's paint the scene. You've got a family in front of you, right? And they just want to keep some fish in their aquarium. And now you've got the two retailers fighting. Oh, store X doesn't know what they're talking about, and store Y doesn't know what they're talking about. That doesn't make a better experience for the family. And so when we find that, we just say, like, well, they have a different way of doing things. Here's how we do it. You can see how it works out in our store or in my fish room. Okay, yep, you're going with them. That's fine. If that doesn't work out, we're still here for you. We're willing to help you through it. And just know that they have different opinions and we have different opinions. And then you might need to hit them with an analogy of like, yep, there's two pizza places. One swears New York style. One swears this other style. They're both good pizzas. They're different ways. But if you're looking to make this type of pizza, we do it this way and we can help you better. If you like that type, the way they're doing it, you'll have a great example there. And the best way I could probably say that is in our little fish niche, if you really want to run the most natural tank ever, do some Dr. Wallstad, Dustin's Fish Tanks, Father Fish method. I have played with those. I find they're not the style of tank I like to keep. I would not stop someone from keeping that. If you want to do that, by all means do that. But the way I will give advice will be towards the way I keep fish. And because I don't keep them that way, I don't do that. And so you might have them saying, you don't need fertilizers, you don't need to feed fish, you don't need to change water, you don't need to do these things. You can set up tanks to run that way. I don't run mine that way. And so the advice I give is like, yeah, I do recommend changing some water. I do recommend feeding the fish. I do recommend using fertilizers. And here are my reasons why. And I've done videos of like, well, I like to move my plants around. I don't like tannins in the water. I do like doing this and that. And, so both methods will work though. That's the important takeaway is that there are a million ways to do a bunch of things and a lot of them will work. Will it work with you? That is a great thing. So if I had like my grandma, for instance, my grandma has dementia and she's losing her mind and it's sad. But if she wanted a fish tank, I would lean towards like, yeah, she's not going to remember to put fertilizer in. She's not even really going to remember to feed. There's a lot of, I could put an auto feeder on there, but I got to set this up to be the most simplistic absolutely possible. She wouldn't care whether there's tannins or not. She won't do water changes. I'll only be able to do it when I visit. And so you might go, yeah, I need to build a tank like that. Now, I personally still didn't do that. When I did that before she had lost a lot of her mental faculties, we used Eco Complete. And when I would visit, like once a month or every 6 weeks, I would dose. It wasn't Easy Green back then. I think it was before I owned my own store. So I would dose a lot of fertilizer to help kind of recharge some of the substrate, put some root tabs in there. But she'd have a fully planted tank. I got a water change once every 3 months. She would feed too much food because she was a grandma and she enjoyed it and loved it. And that worked out just fine. So, do it whatever way you want to do it. And I try my hardest. I'm human like everybody else. I try to stay as much as I can out of the drama of like, look, if you want to make me look terrible because I keep fish a certain way, that's fine. People gravitate towards me that want to keep fish like I do or want at least to not be judged for the way they're doing it. I find it the only part that I have the hardest time with is not qualifying the method. So like I'm trying to think of another analogy because it'll get too fish political if I keep on this train. But like, it would be okay. Here's a great example. It would be like Dean, who is a professional cook, professionally trained, was even a teacher for many years on the culinary arts. It would be like Dean if you had, let's say, someone that goes, I want to learn how to make a certain sauce. And Dean just goes, well, it's super easy. You just do it to taste. That is, in my opinion, misleading somebody who is new, because that's not true. If you don't give them the building blocks of like, well, when would you add this component? What temperature would you use? Just like, when would you do water changes? Or when would you look out for disease? Or when would you do that? It misleads someone that's new. Now, someone that's not new and go, okay, I know how to cook. And now you're having an elevated conversation with Dean, and you're going, hey, I know how to make this sauce, this sauce, this sauce, and this sauce. What's the trick to making that sauce that I don't know? And he goes, oh yeah, it's this ingredient to taste. You now, because you have that knowledge base, can use that. When you don't have that, that's where it gets into trouble. So someone new to the hobby, when they just hear like, yes, don't do water changes, don't feed your fish, and use dirt, you literally can see some pretty bad disasters. And it's like, well, you need the context to go along with that to set them up for the success, I find. And so where the way I keep fish tanks, telling them to change water, to feed their fish, to test their water, to watch these things, there still are failures. But I find there to be less failures because they're at least watching it. Our human nature is to neglect things of like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that only works so long until, oop, it is broke. Now I have to fix it. Let's see here. Some guppy tails are so big they seem to be struggling to swim. Can the tails be too big? Yes. 100% they can be too big, and I go out of my way to not buy those strains because you're just battling the weakened immune system, as I find. They're slower to get to the food. They expend more energy to get to that food. They are more likely to sit on the bottom and get bacterial infections. All of those things just make it harder to keep that fish. So, yeah. Corey's analogies are the best way to diffuse the anger of the fish police. Yeah, and I want it to be clear, when I do highlight maybe guppy or like betta people, axolotl people, they're 90% of all of these groups are people, just normal people that are totally nice and you would love to hang out at their house. But there are some, there's that much smaller group that are very opinionated. And the thing is, there's no filter when it comes to online. And so what I mean by that is you can have people that have problems, like mental problems and just hang-ups and having a bad day, and they got fired yesterday and this is going on, and they're going to take it out on somebody. And there's no filter to filter that out of the internet. And so you can get some overzealous people that it's no different than, I don't really have a reason to be teaching 5th grade math. I just don't. Right. And so someone who's trained to do that's going to do a better job. Right. And then in these groups, you get like, well, if you just only taught math by 5th graders joining a group, and then you have everybody in your family trying to teach 5th graders on how to do math, they're all going to have different systems and things that work for them. And I think this method works better, and this happens, and this happens. And because there's so much noise, no one really is getting that one-on-one, let's help you understand the whole way through. And that's what happens a lot of times is in these groups, you will get someone has a problem and they've got 70 answers to it with 6 different methods, and they honestly don't know which direction to go in. And when they do go into one, then the 4 other methods go, you're doing it wrong. And they're going, oh, well, then I'll do it this method. And then the 4 other methods are going, you're doing it wrong. And likely any one methods, if you get one-on-one help and you go down that trajectory, would be successful. And that's most things in life. It's real hard when you don't know what you're doing to go like, well, this trick works for multiplication, but not for division and for addition. And like, what about the 9s and 11 times tables? Like, what about the 5s? And what about prime numbers? Like, there's all these things that don't just go through all the numbers or go through all the fish or all the methods. You have to kind of be taken on a linear path to understand the path. And when we crowdsource in these groups and things, the path is not linear. It's here's a bunch of things and you need to sort them in the correct order or it won't work out. And that's very difficult to do. You might watch a Father Fish video, then an Aquariumcoop video, then a Bob Steenfot video, then a Father Fish video, then a Dustin's Fish Tank video, and then a Father Fish video, and then a Corey video, then a King of DIY video, then a KG Tropical video. And all of those styles and everything are different. And you're just like, I think I've learned things, but just because you learn things doesn't mean they all went together, right? So learning one thing about addition and one thing about literature and one thing about geometry and one thing about cooking, you spent the whole day learning, but they didn't get you any closer on any one subject. See the difference there? And that's what happens a lot when the fish police is like, I think you've gotten this part wrong. I think you got that part wrong. I think you got that part wrong. And even though they're all trying to help, they aren't trained usually in the way of identifying like what is the problem and how do I help this person get to the next step. Let's see here. Try working in healthcare? I'm sure. I mean, I would say we get a glimpse of it in animal health. I'm sure it's even more so in healthcare, right? My Nana says all you got to do is drink bone broth and it fixes a broken arm. You know, like, oh, does it? Yeah, it worked for my cousin. And then you like meet the cousin and his arm's just like broke. You could tell like heel's broken. You're like, I mean, it physically works, but there might be a better way to do that. And there's always the home remedies and the myths and all that. And yeah, so I am sure that happens a ton. Let's see here. Yeah, are we buying all our stuff? We got the new Easy Dechlorinator, which if you need some dechlorinator, you can switch to ours and it'll work for you. 1 milliliter per 10 gallons, just like the Easy Green. We got it in a bundle for you. You can get Easy Green, root tabs, and Easy Dechlorinator and save yourself a little bit of money. We've got the mystery pack of plants. Do we still have 61 of 62 in stock? Let's see. See if we're running low yet on any. Come on, load. Looks like we're still good. We've been ramping up and trying to keep more and more and more in stock for you guys. Oh, nope. We are sold out of pearlweed as well. So now we are at 60 of 62 plants. So that means some of them are probably starting to get low because there's only, a lot of them will be like, yeah, give me 200 of that one, 600 of that one, 400 of that one. When you start losing or start selling out of some, a lot of times you start selling like, oh, it's a domino effect. After the live stream, we sold out of 6 more types of plants. So sometimes it's a case of who submits first, especially in the live streams. We'll see that. Like, it was in my cart in the live stream and it was out of stock. Like, well, if there's 200 people with dwarf hairgrass and we only have 100 of them in stock, that's going to be a problem. Let's see here. Salt sounds like a myth. I used it, but can you explain what salt does for guppies? Sure. In general, when it comes to, so salt in itself, I don't know how it cures bacteria. It might be the same method, but for parasites, what it does is when you increase the salinity of water, it draws, okay, it's going to get a little nerdy, a little hard to understand. Basically, when something is more salty and something is less salty in the water, it attempts to make them be the same. So if this has 10 parts of salt and this has 5 parts of salt, the goal, what's going to happen in water, it wants to make it so it's 7.5 and 7.5. That's what its goal is. But during that process, right, so we've got 10 parts in the water and 5 parts in the fish, or the parasite, ick, right? It might start trying to bring in that salt. Well, ick might die at 6 salt, right? So 10 in the water, 5 in the fish, and at 6 parts of salt, ick can't survive anymore. And the fish can take 7.5. So we will kill the ick before we will kill the fish. And the way it does it is by actually creating hypersalinity, either much more or much less salt in the organism. And so basically what actually happens is a bunch of salt in the water draws out the fresh water from the parasite and dehydrates it. So just like if you don't drink enough water, you get dehydrated, we are doing that to parasites. Without looking it up, I don't know if that's the same process that works on bacteria. I don't know if it's pulling the water out and dehydrating bacteria or not. I'm actually not sure about that. I've only looked it up and researched it about parasites. Salt does work really well on bacteria also, but I'm not sure of the exact method in which it does it. I guess I could Google it right now. Maybe something easy like, does salt dehydrate bacteria in fish? Let's see. Does someone... okay, I'll just read this out loud. I don't know if it's true or not yet. I'm just reading the first thing that comes from the Food and Agricultural Organization. Fish flesh contains 75 to 80% water. Fatty fish is 60 to 65. And during salting, some of this water is removed and replaced by salt. A concentration of 6 to 10% of salt in the fish tissue, together with the drying effect due to loss of water, will prevent the growth of most spoilage bacteria and prevent a loss. So when you salt a fish to preserve it, that's the process that's happening. So it sounds like, the drying effect due to water loss will prevent the growth of most spoilage bacteria. But I bet you some more research would tell us how it's actually doing it when you have a live bacteria, because live bacteria will be killed by salt on fish. So, yeah, DBC Aquatics says salt draws moisture out of bacterial cells through a process called osmosis. Yeah, so that's the same with parasites then. I try to lay away from osmosis because a lot of people don't really understand that concept. So equalize, people go, oh, equal. They understand that word. Osmosis is a little more like, what does that actually mean or do? So yeah, it sounds like it basically dehydrates bacteria also through osmosis, which fish also use osmosis a lot. That's how they get rid of the waste out of their bodies a lot as well. So yeah, sometimes a quick little Googling and just a little more research, and sometimes you read stuff 10 years ago and you're like, I don't want to speak to that without re-brushing up on that because I know it works, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to start oh no, salt kills bacteria by feeding it too much or something. You don't want to start a crazy rumor if you don't know. I try not to. Doesn't mean I don't, because sometimes I get stuff wrong for sure, but I try to not willingly go, I should brush up on that before yeah. Which salt and formula? In general, what we're talking about today would just be aquarium salt. Do I have some here? I might. Yep. Like any aquarium salt work, whether it's API, that kind of stuff, or even rock salt from like a Home Depot, as long as it's just NaCl. But when it comes to actually medicating, I like the Fritz because it's a very fine salt, easy to dissolve, not problematic, easy to measure, and you can order it, that kind of stuff. But almost any just straight up NaCl will work all the same. We sell this one. I like this one, but I buy giant 40-pound bags of it, solar salt from Home Depot for the store when we use it because we're just using so much of it. So there you go. Yeah, dosages. You can see the link that Candy linked. There's so much to it, but in general, it's somewhere between 1 tablespoon to 1 to 5 gallons, depending on what you think might be going on and what risk level you're willing to take and all of that. And then knowing that salt doesn't evaporate, so you got to know that. It only comes out with water changes. It doesn't lose efficacy like a med would, which that's probably too fancy a word. It doesn't lose effectiveness like a med does over time. It also can stand up to UV sterilizers, which is nice. So there's a lot of things going for salt. Yes, and there is a difference between aquarium salt and marine salt. Marine salt is salt with a bunch of minerals and buffers and things like that. And if you can get into trouble if you start using a tablespoon of that salt per gallon versus just normal aquarium salt. You can get really high pHs and hardnesses and other things going on that would stress the fish out a lot. So you want to be careful with that. But Fritz aquarium salt, great. API salt, fine too. Yeah, just salt. And why it seemingly is like seems like a myth is it's not super well documented on every fish, what dosage, what disease, all that, what length of time, what temperature. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but it does work. Talking about movies again. How to raise general hardness quickly. Well, you usually don't want to do it too quickly, but I like using wonder shells or plankton banquet blocks or our additive that we'll come out with. I like for it to dissolve into water over the course of a few days. Usually you don't have an instance where like, oh, my water was really hard, and then it's not. It's hard, less hard, less hard, less hard, less hard, less hard. Like a month later, like, oh, there's like no hardness. And then you put like a block in there, and then it's like, well, there's nothing. A tiny bit more, tiny bit more, tiny bit more, tiny bit more, till eventually you're like, hey, that's enough. I'm a sales associate at my local fish store. How do you train or mentor your staff to become the best they possibly can at this job? I wouldn't even say I'm that good at it. I don't know. You kind of one of the things that I think is the hardest thing to get through to people is that these are animals. You can't have a bad day when you're taking care of animals. You can't go, well, I'm just too lazy. I'm going to let them die. So really getting them past the fact of like, yes, you're sales. Yes, you do this for pay. But at the end of the day, you need to like these animals because working with animals is hard work. It's difficult. It's challenging. And you can't afford to have bad days when lives are at stake. Same thing with doctors and nurses and vets and anything that's taking care of another live thing. So filtering for that, like you really gotta want the to work with the animal. And then you can work on, well, how do you sell better? How do you do this better? You can work on all those things, but you got to want to be there and you got to want to learn. And I find that that's real difficult to get someone to want to do if they don't already want to do that. If you don't want to, clean up fish poop, then it's going to be really hard for you to really want to do it if you just don't want to do it. You can't really convince you, no, but it's fun. Like, you gotta go. It's worth it. It's worth vacuuming out the poop out of this aquarium to get to look at these fish. And if it's not for you, it's just not. And you got to figure out maybe this isn't for you. It's kind of like people that work in care homes and facilities. Like you got to love humans and want to help people through their hardest times. Like a memory care facility, like for my grandmother, which she's not in a facility. She doesn't want to go to one, but my aunt takes care of her. There are days when my grandmother is very mean. She's scared. She doesn't know what's going on, and those days are the hardest. You're taking care of someone and they don't want to be taken care of and they don't think they need it and they don't want it. And you have all these oppositions, but you have to because it's a living thing and you want to take care of it. Same thing with a fish. They trying to bite you. They're running from you. You're trying to help them and get them in a quarantine tank to do all that. They have to know that they're scared and you're taking care of this animal and you got to do your best, and that's what it is. And so the sooner you can get on that train of thought and you really want to do what's best for the animal, they will typically do better at their job. Now you can have it taken too far where it's like, well, this needs all the meds. It needs, every betta needs a 100-gallon tank, and that, like, there is a balance between, what makes sense business-wise and what makes sense for an animal. But making sure that people really, truly actually want to be there and care for it, that is one of the biggest hurdles. Getting them there first of like, yep, you want to take care of the animal and that's what you're into. Great. And so for us, a lot of times we want people to keep aquariums at home. That's a great sign. Like if you're already doing this for fun, it's more likely you're willing to do it while you're getting paid also, but if you're just like, oh, it's just a job, those people typically don't love it. They can do the job, but they don't love it. So that's a different thing. Wait, you reuse a salt bath and don't make a new batch each day while treating? I don't do salt baths. We treat the aquarium, which all of this, any advice I ever give, this is always a starting point. So you either have like, oh, I've read a whole book on it and now you're getting a little tidbit from me, or this is the first I've heard and I'm now going to do a bunch more research over the next few days and become more fluent in it. So, if you just hear like, oh yeah, I do this one thing with this one med, that is part of a much bigger conversation when you're understanding meds. A nurse to a nurse can go, hey, I think this helps. I found this, where a nurse to someone who's never used that med before, they have no context of what you're even talking about. So it doesn't make sense to them yet. You got to know the context. So, yeah. Definitely do research. Definitely try to become well versed, especially when you're using medicines and live animals and things like that. Why are fish at the stores so often skinny? Most times because they're not getting fed at wholesalers, and then they come into a store, and even if you feed them really as much as you can, like, so imagine this. Imagine that, and this is a likely scenario. Imagine that you bring in 50,000 cardinal tetras from the wild to a wholesaler, and they sell on average 5,000 cardinal tetras, right? Now, there are some that will never feed them. So now by the time you're getting the last batch, week 10, they haven't eaten in 10 weeks, right? Or maybe they are feeding them and they're going, look, it's a tablespoon of food per tank, and maybe there's 5 tanks. So it's 5 tablespoons of food. Well, it's not enough food to put weight on them. So they basically still haven't eaten in like 10 weeks. Then they get to your store, right? And I put them through quarantine. They ran in my store, and I'm feeding them really well. And for them to get their weight back on, it's 10 to 12 weeks. I would lose money doing that. So instead, you feed them as best you can. You put them out on the floor for sale, and knowing that when they hit a customer's house, as long as they're healthy, they're going to put weight back on. And so you're feeding them there as best you can and trying to bulk them up, but that takes like 10 weeks, and they will sell before it's been 10 weeks. So that's how you get there. Now, you would think, why don't they sell them, or why don't they feed them before they sell them? Well, they got to clean them. The more you feed, the more you got to clean, and that costs food, costs money. And so oftentimes there are people working in facilities like that that don't care about the fish. In fact, I would argue most of the time who I see working at wholesalers are doing it as a job and not because they like fish. And so you might have 20 people on staff. 3 of them are the biggest fish nerds you'll ever meet, and they absolutely love it. And then you've got 17 of them that are like, yep, I get paid X an hour, and the minute that clock is done, I'm out. I'll do exactly what I'm told, not a lot else. And I don't know enough to do much else. And so if you get told, like, yeah, put a little bit of food in each tank, and that's what you do, yeah, and you don't realize, oh, these are underfed, these need to do this. And lots of wholesalers try to train them, and then but a year later they leave because they're like, well, it's hot and stinky and all of this. And then I worked the first summer there, and it was 1 billion degrees. I'm not doing that anymore, and I can go get a desk job. And that cycle repeats over and over and over and over and over again. And then you could say, like, well, why don't you spend 10 weeks feeding them up and then sell them? Then you'd have Dan's Fish, where you're like, oh, neon tetras are $6 or $7. It's like, yeah, if you got to sit on a fish for 3 months to get it healthy again, or not healthy, it already is healthy, to get it up to weight again, selling it at like $3, you would lose money every time. And so that's where we're at. So it's a cart before the horse thing. Like, if everyone's buying $10 cardinal tetras, they're all going to be fat and happy. But when you have some people going, well, we'll sell them for 2, we'll sell them for 5, we'll sell them for 4, we'll sell them for 6, and then the customers choose where they're buying them, and usually customers buy based on price. Whoever's the cheapest is who they'll buy for the majority. Then there's some that will go, okay, I'll buy based on what is healthiest. Then there's that demographic. And there's very few that, like, and that's where programs are failing. Like Project Piaba, they don't realize that the average public doesn't care whether that cardinal tetra was sourced ethically or not. They just don't care. Like, the random person you see on the street, on average, doesn't care. And you go, but I do, Corey, I'm in the live stream. And I go, great. For every one of you, there are 100 people just on the street buying a cardinal tetra that will never be in a live stream, never watch a YouTube video about fish. They just have fish. They don't care. They will buy who's cheapest. And so when that's the majority of a customer that would show up at a retail store, doesn't do you any good to be like, yep, neon tetra is $7, but they're sustainably done. And they go, great, you're selling 20 a week. Meanwhile, your competitor is selling 200 a week to the people that will pay $3 a piece and don't care about the sustainability because it's not even an issue they're really aware of yet. They just go, one's $6, one's $3. I buy $3. So it's over time, we hope to get better and better and better. That would be the hope. People like Dan are working on it. I try to work on sustainable products, like this heater at $140 that I showed in the last live stream. Like, that's what it's going to take for people to get heaters that are going to last a really, really long time. And, but most people go, I can buy a heater for $20. Sure, you can. It's not going to be where we need them to go, though. Have I ever heard of a fish staying purple after using an ick treatment? It's been 3 weeks since my treatment. My discus are still purple. Usually that's just stress. So that darker color usually is what discus do when they're stressed. If they're not eating, that's usually not very good. So I'd watch out for that. But yeah, it doesn't stain them. It's just they probably got knocked back health-wise. So it'd be like, have you ever seen someone get sick and then it seemed like it took them like 6 months to get back to themselves? Like they're just like their body's been run down. They've been working a lot and all that's been happening. Like, yeah, I've seen that. And it just takes a long time to pull out of that if they got real weak. Ooh, 5 more memberships from Killer Kitty. Thank you very much. I will match that, so we'll get 5 more. If you're getting these memberships, you can sync your account on the website. Save 5% everything there. You can watch all the videos or the live streams. So every month we hire an expert in their field to give a lecture. It was breeding catfish yesterday, and there's lots of other cool stuff. You can watch all of those for the next 30 days. If you enjoy it, think about subscribing, because we do that live stream once a month. You do get that discount all the time. There's the coins. There's other little things. You get heads up on new products first. You can get some discounts at some of the retail partner stores that offer discounts also. You can get discount in our store, even on our fish and stuff. So you've got all that going on. And we're always looking at, well, what's another thing we could do for memberships and stuff. It's not a have to, it's a purely want to, or, get a little bit of benefit out of that. So yeah, we'll give another 5 away. Man, we're a long way from guppies. We are indeed. That's what happens in 2 hours. It's hard to keep people on track. All right, well, it's now 5 o'clock. It's time to go visit Grandma. We'll be doing that. And yeah, that completes roughly 4.5 hours of live streaming today. So hopefully I made up for last week missing. I didn't like doing that. I will be live again next Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Maybe early, but probably not. I don't always have this extra time. Hopefully you got what you needed out of these live streams. If you didn't know we had another one, there's another 2.5 hour one. They'll both be going to the podcast if you're listening there. And yeah, thanks for showing up. Please buy all of our stuff. That helps us a ton. I love that. And we'll keep trying to do what we do, and more products will come. We've got the Easy to Chlorinator that's out right now, and we'll see what we can launch in the next month or so if things come in. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next week.